Welcome to the Remark Support webinar series. Today's topic is on the new features that will be in our upcoming Remark Office OMR 2014 release. We're pretty excited to get this release out there, and I know the big question is going to be when. So we are looking at releasing the product in August of this year. So at this point, we want to get you familiar with all the new features that will be available to you. So to that end, we are going to actually jump right into the product. And we're going to step through all the different new features. So as you first log into the software, what you will first see is this little helpful link window. And the reason we did this, and the theme you'll see throughout the software, is that we're trying to make the software a little bit easier to use. It's a very mature product. It's been around for over 20 years, so it has a lot of features. There are some people that only use, a subset of the features. There are some people that are more power users and want to use everything. So we tried to strike a balance in this version to get the features most people need right up front and center without overwhelming you, but still have those other more advanced features available relatively easily. So to that end, we added this little window that pops up the first time you run the software. And this is for the new user, just to help you understand what you're going to do right out of the gate. So we added a couple of links here. The first one is Getting Started, and we have access to the tutorials, which of course is helpful to learn the software. And we also created a couple of quick start guides, one for doing survey style forms and one for doing tests or exams. And it's just a quick overview to let you know the steps that you would take to go down either of those paths, just to get you started so you're not kind of wondering, how do I begin? Then of course we have the links to our users guides. There's the main Remark Office OMR and as well as the Remark Quick Stats users guide. And then for most of you who are on this webinar, we added a What's New video, and that video will go through all the features that have changed or been added since the previous version. So that will be helpful. It'll be a lot of what we cover today, but that will be helpful to have so that you understand what's new and where you can access it. So once we've got that, we can just click this button. And this is the main interface. Let me go ahead and open a template so it looks more like what you're used to. And this is what we have. It's really the same layout. It just got a facelift. So on the left, we still have our task pane with things that you would frequently use. And we've tried to update that to make it as intuitive as possible so that it has the major things you would need, maybe some things you didn't know about. And then of course it updates itself based on where you are in the software. You still have your data grid where all your processing happens, your image viewer at the bottom, and your graph viewer at the bottom that just kind of shows you a quick real-time analysis. So what I'm going to do first is go into the template editor. So let's open this template in there. And not a ton of changes here, so we'll just go through these kind of quickly. Same, again, look and feel update here. But one of the things that's happened a lot over the years is you might be processing your forms and you find that you need to make a change to the template. So you come into the template or you make the change, but you forget or don't realize that you need to reopen that template in the data center to get those changes. Well, you no longer have to do that. For example, if I take on this basic exam answer sheet that we're starting with, if I take away this bonus question at the bottom, I'm just going to delete it. And I'm going to save this template. If I now go into the data center, it's going to prompt me. And there's two different prompts you could get. What I did was a pretty major change because I took away an actual question. So if I had already processed some forms and had data on the screen, that data is really no longer valid. And that's what this message is saying. And it's asking me, do I want to open the template in a new tab? So I'll click yes, and if you look down here, I now have a second copy of the template open that I can work with. Now the other message you might see is if you made a change, let's say I changed a field name or something that's a little bit more minor and doesn't really affect the data that I've already processed, if I had data open, it would just warn me that I have made a change. Do you want to reload the template but preserve all your existing data? So those would be the two messages you might see. The nice thing is you don't have to keep, bouncing back and forth and reopening the template each time. So let's go back to our template editor, and I'm actually going to recreate that particular region. So you still have all your toolbar buttons up here. I'm going to go to OMR, and just make this region again. And I'm going to call it, I know it says bonus, but I'm going to call it rubric. And the reason I want to do that is I want to tell you about a new feature called rubrics that we added. So in the testing world, as many of you probably already know, basically a rubric is a multiple choice question, but it sort of has a scale. I kind of think of it as a objective subjective hybrid question. So the student might fill in an answer, and maybe on the low end of the scale it's, they don't understand it, it's completely wrong, all the way up to the high end of the scale where yes, they get this concept. So the teacher applies this rubric to the answer that the student chose. And the way you would do that, I'm going to show you right here, is you make it, most of the time it's going to be a multiple choice question. The data type is going to be textual. And then if you look in the region layout area, a new feature here is that we are automatically calculating how many columns and rows are in the region. I have 5 columns for A through E in just the one row. I do have to set my orientation, which is row in this case. Another item that's new here, you can't exactly see it, but if this were a grid region, let's say you're bubbling in your name, we added the ability to either read the grid from the bottom to the top or the right to the left. So for example, let's say you had a form in Arabic, and the Arabic language reads from right to left. You would be able to set that up. So just as always, I'm going to enter my labels, and they're A through E in this case. Now in the advanced region properties, the area that I would tell Remark that this is a rubric is in this testing point system. So we've always had objective and subjective, but now I'm going to say it's a rubric. Now when I go to process my key, that's when I'm going to say how many points this rubric is worth, 5, 10, whatever it might be. And then based on the answers chosen, they're going to get that number of points. So if the A bubble's worth 1 point all the way up to the E bubble being worth 5, then the student will get somewhere between 1 and 5 points for this question. I'm going to click OK. And there aren't really any other major changes in the template editor. So I'm going to save this. And of course, when we go back in the data center, we're going to get prompted. So I'm going to go ahead and open this template one more time. And let's get some data in here. So once again, I can go to read. Now I will mention that we've gotten away from the wizard terminology. So anywhere that it used to say read, like, wizard, like read wizard, we've taken away the wizard part. So in the read window, we still have all of our options, but again, we tried to simplify the layout. So of course you can either scan with a scanner that's hooked up to your computer, or you can read images that you've already scanned, which is what I'm going to do. And then before on this screen, there were a whole bunch of other options kind of right front and center. They're still here, but now you would just expand them by clicking this advanced options. And the 3 main things are going to be auto form ID mode, which is the first checkbox. And that's when you put an identifier on each form you want to scan, and you can scan a bunch of different form types at once. And Remark recognizes that identifier on the form and matches it to the right template. We also have the server mode option, which is when you just let Remark run in the background, and it either looks in a folder or at your scanner to find out if there's anything to process, and it just does it automatically. And then we have this archive images after processing. That was called package and rename in version 8. When you read images, you can take those images after they're processed and then repackage them or archive them either to another location or to a different file formats for more permanent storage. So this is all here, but for the basic user who doesn't want to see this, they don't have to. But for the power user who needs that stuff, they just click a button. The recognition settings are also here. We had that in here before as a link, and that just takes you into all the different settings you can tweak if you're having any difficulties recognizing your forms. Now the other thing I want to point out is this link at the bottom that says Modify Database Connection Settings. There's a feature in the software called Database Lookup, which is not a new feature, but what it does is it takes a region on your form and it links it to an external file like an Excel spreadsheet or an Access database, and it looks up the information in that file and returns additional information. So in my case, I have a student ID on my form, and what I'm doing is linking to an Excel file that looks like this, where Remark reads the student ID and finds it in the database, and then I can return any of this information I want to my data set. And the reason you might want to do that is to get external data into your data for reporting purposes. So I can bring in the gender, for example, and whether they participate in the National School Lunch Program. And then when I get to Remark Quick Stats to run my analysis, I can actually break the data down by these items. So it's a quick way to get, in my case, what's private data that you wouldn't want on the form into your data set so that you can report on it later. And the reason I mention it is what would happen previously is, let's say you're in a school, or it doesn't have to be a test, but anywhere where you share templates. In a school setting, you might have a 50-question form, a 100-question form that teachers share. You don't want to recreate the wheel every time. However, that database file is going to be different per teacher. So I might have a database on my system and someone else might have one on their system. And it was somewhat cumbersome to go back into the template every time and modify that link to the database. So we added it right here. And if I click that, all I have to do is everything's set up. I just have to go to the browse area and pull up my Excel file. And as long as the fields are the same, all this information will still be set up for me. I can save this to the template for myself, and then I'm ready to roll with my scanning. So it's just a quick way to get to those settings so that you can share templates but update the database on the back end. So let's go ahead and click Next. This part's really the same. I'm just going to add the images that I've already scanned and click Read. And it's going to process. Now, one thing that is different is how you do the reviewing of the exceptions. So we have a blank up here and a multiple response down here. And in the task pane, we've always done our reviewing. So you still can start it there by clicking Review and pick what you want to review on. But instead of working in this task pane during the review, it's now up at the top. So you have an option to end. I'll explain the microphone shortly. And then you have your previous and next exceptions here, and then this bar is where you actually can do the editing. So let me click Next. So here's a blank. I'm just going to leave that. This one has a crossed out mark, so I'm going to pick D because that's what they wanted, and this one should be D, and so forth. You can still just kind of enter your way through or click Next, but it's all up at the top now instead of in this little tiny task pane. And when you're finished, you can either save or discard the changes. So I'm going to save them. And now I've finished my review. Now I want to point something out that is in the current version, but I'll tell you in a minute why I am going to point it out. So here's all of our advanced recognition options. And the one I want to go to is the Ignore Large Marks. So you saw that cross out on my form. If you turn on Ignore Large Marks, Remark actually is intelligent enough to, if there's 2 marks chosen and one's crossed out, to see the crossed out one and know that that's not intended and use the actual filled mark. So, and I'll show you in a minute why I'm showing you this. Let me delete this data and read those forms again. Now, when they read this time, I believe in here was a crossed out mark. So now you can see C was crossed out, D was chosen. And Remark was smart enough to figure that out. And the reason I want to show you that feature is not new, but what is new is if I go to Save Data, we have some new formats. So we've always had our Remark formats, which is the RMK and the ROA, the Office Archive. The ROA is the one that packages up your template and your data and your images into one file. Now we have 2 new flavors of those. We have the Remark Extended and the Remark Extended Office. And what the Extended does is it takes that information about marks that were crossed out, as well as any data changes. If you go in and change an answer in the grid manually, or via review exceptions, or find and replace, that type of thing, it stores all of that in the background. And if you save to one of these extended formats, it'll save it permanently in the file. And in a minute, we'll see we've added some reports that show you how many times answers were changed. And this would be, if you are concerned that students might be looking off of each other's paper, or as much as I don't like to say it, there were recent, issues where teachers were changing forms after the fact or changing data. If you're concerned about something in that area, these reports can help you kind of pinpoint if something kind of fishy is going on. The other new formats I'll point out are, of course, Access 2013 and Excel 2013. We've also added the StatPac format, which is a survey analysis application, as well as ExamSoft, which is an online testing program. And we have CSV now. It was called ASCII before, but CSV is probably the most universal format out there for transporting data back and forth between software programs. And then at the top of the window here where these icons are, we've also added shortcuts to Dropbox and Google Drive. So when you install those on your computer, that puts folders on your system and they're synced to your cloud account. So if you were to save into one of these folders, it would be synced right up to the cloud for you. All right, let's do some analysis because there's a lot of changes there. We still have our 4 options. They're just renamed. So Easy Grade is called Quick Grade. The Grade Wizard is called Advanced Grade. Easy Survey is called Quick Survey. And the Survey Wizard is called Advanced Survey. So Quick Grade would do just what it did before. It would grade everything against the first row of data, assuming it's the key. So I'm going to go into Advanced Grade. And this is another area where we tried to streamline it so that if you wanted, all the features, you can get to them. But if you don't need to see all those features, we've kind of scaled it back so that you're not kind of clicking a next button through this like a wizard. So on the first screen, you can, of course, open a saved answer key. And then what we did was we pulled out some things we thought people might want to use that were buried in the Grade Wizard before. So the first one is the grade scale. So there's this grade scale editor here, and you can either choose a new one or obviously, choose an existing one or type in a new grade scale to apply to the test. So it's right kind of front and center here. You can apply a benchmark, which is a score that you want students to achieve, and then Remark shows you which students have and have not achieved that score. So we had that before, but one of the new features is instead of entering an actual value like 70%, you can use the class average. So Remark would grade the test, and then it would just take that class average and show you who's above the average and who's below the average. And then you can also use custom report headers. So on each report is this header area, and you've always been able to either add a logo or text or information out of your data set. The window to do that is a bit cumbersome. So what we did here was pull out top 3 slots. So your top left, top center, and your top right are in these drop downs here. And you can just choose the values that you want. Maybe I want the date, and I want to do the teacher's name. So that will be in my head at the top of the report. Now, if you do want to customize this, you certainly still can. You just click More Options, and it takes you into the old window that we've always had, just again got a facelift. And you can go into any one of these 9 slots here and customize it with your own information, whether that's text or a logo or some piece of data from your form. So at this point, if that's all you needed, you could click Grade. I'm going to step through and show you some of the other options. The answer key, of course, is where you acquire your key. Nothing's really changed here. You can get it from the data or scan it, or if you have a text key, you can import that. I'm going to grab it out of my data set. But again, nothing has really been updated here. So then we have our question properties, and just this got a bit of an overhaul. Anything that's an identifier has a little gray badge next to it, and that means that that's an analysis respondent ID that will show up on your reports. So like the student name, for example, is a good one to have linked to the report. Gender, I probably don't want, so I can just turn that off here. All these grayed out items are just ungraded questions, which makes sense. In my case, they're just demographics. And then the ones with the orange dot are the graded questions. And one of the new features is partial credit, which I'll show you here. So whenever you have more than one correct response, let's say A and B, you can award partial credit. And it works in 2 different ways. So we have this checkbox that says all correct answers must be chosen to be considered correct. And that would mean that you're expecting, in this case, students to pick A and B. If I want to allow partial credit, I just check the box and I click this partial credit button. Let's say this question's worth 2 points. So in order to get all 2 points, they have to pick A and B, meaning that each one's worth a point. If they only pick A or they only pick B, they get 1 point. And there's this little try out your scoring here to make sure you've set it up correctly. If they pick B or A and an incorrect answer, they're not getting any credit because we already said they have to pick A and B. So if they pick both, that's how they're going to get full credit. So that's what we call an AND situation, where you're expecting both correct answers and you're just allocating the points across the 2 answers. Now the other case is where there's really only one correct answer. So I turn this option to off, that all correct answers must be chosen. And let's say the scenario is, you graded the test and A was the right answer, but half or maybe more than half of the students thought B was the right answer. So that kind of jumps out at you as a problem. So you look at the test and you think, well, it was kind of confusing. I understand why they thought B was the right answer. I'm not going to give them full credit, but I want to give them something. So in that case, for your partial credit, if it's still worth 2 points, let's say, A would be worth the full 2 points. But because you understand why they chose B, you're going to, let's say, give them a point. So in our scoring, let's test it out. If they pick A, they get 2 points. If they click B, they get 1 point. Any other answer, obviously no points. Now, if they were to pick A and B, they're not going to get credit because, again, you were only expecting one answer. So as soon as you go over one answer, it's just wrong. But as long as they picked one of these ones that you said was correct, they'll at least get full or partial credit. So that's how partial credit works. Let's move on to learning objectives. So we've always had the ability to do learning objectives, and basically that's when you have a state standard or something that you're measuring students' knowledge of, and you take the questions on the form and map them to the learning objective. And then Remark produces an overall test score, but it also gives you scores on those subsets of questions. So it's still in here, it's just got a new look to it. So you click New, and you type in your objective. Now what is new is you can type in a description. Let's say students can spell 10 words. This is a spelling objective. Before, all you would get is the objective name. So now we have these descriptions that will show up on the reports. The other new feature is the grade scale. So previously you could apply one grade scale to all learning objectives. Now you can do them individually. So I can say this one's mastery, so 70% is mastered. Then I can add another grade scale. And let's say students identify all pronouns. So this is more of a grammar thing. I can click Edit Grade Scale and pick a different grade scale. Let's do the elementary scale. So it's kind of nice that, if you're looking for different things, you can apply those different grade scales to each learning objective. You still have the ability to benchmark the learning objective. And once again, you can do the class average or a custom, just like at the test level. And then just like before, you just take the questions over here that apply to each learning objective. We kind of flip the screens here, but you just pick whichever ones apply and add them over using these arrows. So now I've got these all set up. Once again, I can just click Grade. I will mention 2 other things. We've always supported multiple test versions. Again, just the window got a facelift. You still have both standard and advanced test versions. Advanced is where you actually modify the question order. It's the more powerful use of the software, where you take your subsequent answer keys and you find the question from the original answer key and tell Remark where it's located on the extra answer key. And what that does, by remapping things and moving them around, everything can be related back to the original, and it makes the reporting more robust, where we can do an item analysis and that type of thing since we understand the questions. Standard multiple keys is where you just basically, let's say I have 3 versions of a test that I distribute so students can't look off of each other's papers. You just basically scan in all 3, Remark looks at the data and says, okay, this student has version A, so I'm going to grade against the A key, and this has B, I'm going to grade against the B key. And we've never been able to do item analysis reports because we just don't know how those questions relate to each other. Question 1 on one person's test is not question 1 on another person's. We did add in this version the ability to do an item analysis when you do standard keys. It's just that they're going to be separate item analyses. So we'll run one on the A version, one on the B version, one on the C version, etc. Whereas with the advanced keys, it's one combined item analysis. But at least now you can get that item analysis if you're doing standard keys. We also have scaled scores. Nothing has changed here. A scaled score is when Remark calculates the score, and then you attach an external database to this answer key, and you have a translated score in that database. So I might, as Remark, produce, the score of 80%, but maybe that means something else to you. Maybe it's a 95 or a letter or whatever it might be. Remark will go out to that database, find out what an 80 means to you, and bring back that translated score. So nothing has changed there. I just want to mention that it is in here. So at this point, we can grade our tests. I'm not going to save the answer key, but you certainly can. And we're going to get into Remark Quick Stats. And there's a lot of changes here. First and foremost is the look. We now have 3 panes. We still have the task pane on the left, the report in the middle, but what's new is this report style pane. And these are all the properties related to the report. Once again, we decided to bring them front and center because we found that people just didn't even know they could customize certain things in here. So let's go through this. I'm going to work left to right. Looking at the task pane first, we have grouped the reports. So we have class and student reports, item analysis, test and item statistics, response reports, changed answer reports, and then your report batches. You can right-click a report in here and either run it. You can make it the default, which I have here. You can also add it to your favorites. So at the top of the list is this favorites folder. So any reports that you use frequently, if you put them in your favorites, then they'll always be at the top here, just making it easier to access them. In the middle, we have our report, and nothing's really changed there. If you do, obviously these 3 panes take up space. If you need more space, you can press F11 and go full screen. You can also move these panes around. You can make them bigger or smaller on either side. And the report properties actually can even be hidden. There's a push pin here. You can just hide it altogether. Now let's get into those report properties. So previously, you would go to the Tools menu and go into the report properties or via the toolbar. But people would ask us lots of times, can I do this? Can I do this? We're like, yes, here it is, but they didn't realize they could do it. So they're grouped here. We have data, formatting, header, footer, and labels. So let me just change something so you can see how it works. Let's say I don't want to show this correct column anymore, so I'm going to turn it off. I can either double click or use the drop down and click apply, and now that column's gone. Or let's go to the header and footer. Let me set this to the default. Let's say on your report header, so we're calling it the student statistics report. Well, maybe that's not what you use. We call it my class report. So I can apply that, and now it says my class report. So you can change anything in here, multiple things at one time, and then just click apply. And if you're ever you want to revert it back, you just click defaults, and it goes back to all the defaults from when the software was installed. What's new here is this labels item. So these labels across the top of the table, some people use different labels in their school setting. So for example, subjective, maybe on this test it's an essay, and you just want to call it essay. You can certainly change that title and click apply, and now this is called essay. So we did add the ability to customize some of these labels. Let's look at a couple of the new reports. So the first is the student achievement report. And this is goes against the benchmark. So I'm using the class average, if you recall, which is 78.5. So it shows which students are above 78.5, which are below. And we kind of muted these colors a little bit. Hopefully they're a little more appealing. But you can customize this. If I just want to quickly see who's not meeting the benchmark, I can go up to the report properties, and where it says include students, here's your choices: achieving, failing, or all. So if I just want to see who did not reach the benchmark, I can click failing to achieve, hit apply, and now I quickly know which students I need to get to do some remediation. And here's a good example of the learning objectives. So before, this learning objective would have just said PA 1, 2, 4, but now here's that description I mentioned earlier, and same with the second learning objective. So particularly if you're giving this report to someone and they don't know what PA 1, 2, 4 is, now you have a little more information for them. The next report I want to show you is the student response similarities. This report allows you to see if students have basically the same number of answers, or the exact same answers. Again, if you think a student might be looking off of another student's paper, this might help you drill down. So in our case, Donna and Greg had 92% similar and all the same correct responses, as you can see in the correct column. And here's the questions they got that were different. Again, all the same. So might be a red flag if you were concerned, already about these two. Maybe they sit next to each other or whatever the case might be. It allows you to just look at whose tests were almost identical. And you can change the threshold. It's 90% identical now, but you can change that to whatever number you like. Now let's go into those changed answer reports I mentioned earlier. So when we talked about those new formats for saving data, I mentioned that we're storing behind the scenes every time either the large mark detection was used to find crossouts, or if data was changed in the grid after the form was processed. And there's four reports here. Let me go to the changed answer by item. And this will go through the questions. So down the left here are the questions and how many times the answer was changed. And then it breaks it down. Was it changed to correct or incorrect? So we just have the one here. So let me get out of here, and I'm going to change a couple of answers so you can see how this works a little bit better. So I'm going to make some change to incorrect and some change to correct, just so you get an idea. Okay, let's try that again. I'm just going to do a quick grade, get back into Remark Quick Stats, and let's go to those changed answer reports again. So now we have a little more data here. Question 4 was changed twice. Here's 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 were all changed once. So there's a graph over here. And actually, if we go to the second page, we can get a summary. So there were 11 changed answers in total. 6 times they were changed to correct and 5 to incorrect. So, an interesting breakdown, a lot of change to incorrect. So that might tell you, okay, I don't think anyone's cheating here. But again, it just gives you an idea of, what's happening with your data. And you can show in the properties either all the changes, or you can choose form change, which would be the crossed out marks on the form, or data change, which would only show data that was changed after the forms were processed. And you can also look at it by student, changed answer by student. So this goes through each student. And the most we see here is 3. Jay Atkins changed his 3 times, once to correct, 2 to incorrect. So I think he just changed his mind, most likely. But, if you saw a student with a lot of changed answers, again, that could be a red flag. And we also have comparative versions of these reports. And what that does just allows you to break down the data by some demographic. So maybe you have multiple teachers' tests scanned at one time, for example, so you could look at how many times answers were changed by teacher. So I did want to point out in the task pane here that we did add this analysis tools section. And again, we're just trying to bring things to the forefront that people might need easy access to. So if you just want to do learning objectives, if I click that link, it takes me right to that window in the advanced grade. And I don't need to look at everything else in here. I can just add my learning objective and click grade. Same with the test versions and the question properties. Again, just a quick way to bring some things to the forefront so that you can do it. We also added a couple of new gradebook formats. One is the Pinnacle format from Global Scholar, and the other is a standard gradebook. And what that does, we've always had a text gradebook in there, but it's several steps to produce the file. This one is just a straight CSV file. It's basically, there's nothing to configure. You're just going to have the student ID and name and your score, and that's it. So that should be able to go into just about any student management system or gradebook. So what I want to do now is close this, and I want to show you a survey form. Let's close these out. I'm going to go back to the template editor, and I want to bring up a different form. So this one's an evaluation for a conference. If you go to a conference and you sit in sessions, you often are asked to take a survey at the end to evaluate either the conference as a whole or the session. And what we did, we found out that people sometimes struggled because they wanted to use the same form for all the evaluations, but they wanted to be able to differentiate the sessions. And maybe, you could put the session on there and OCR it or barcode it, but sometimes they didn't want to do that. So we added this property to image regions. So I've created an image region in the corner, and I'm not actually capturing anything. What I'm doing is, in the properties, I'm saying prompt me for the fill value in reading. And what's going to happen is every time I read a batch of forms, I'm going to type in the session name in this case. It could be anything. If you were doing a course evaluation, it could be the name of the course, or you could do 2 of these and do the course and the teacher. It's kind of like a batch header, if you've ever used that, which is an actual form that you scan that has information on it that identifies the data. But now you don't need that form. You can just put it into an image region and type it in on the fly. And I'll show you how that works. Let's open up this template to scan. So I'm going to read in some forms. Now when I click read, I get this extra window. So let's say this is a session evaluation, and this one is called Ethics and Evaluation. So now what's going to happen is, in that image region that I created, it's going to put in for me Ethics and Evaluation for every form that I scan. Now let's say I'm ready to read a new batch. Do the same thing. And it might be more of that batch, but if I'm onto a second thing, I could say, let's say this is called Evaluation Tools. Click OK. And now it's adding that title in for me. So what this allows me to do is, when I analyze this data, I'm going to get an overall idea of how the performance was. But now I can also break down the data by each session relatively easily. So the other thing I wanted to show you was the speech recognition. So we added the ability to utilize the Microsoft speech recognition engine. And I will say right out of the gate that it's not our technology, so it is important that you get it working well through Windows, because we can't really troubleshoot it. But essentially what it does is, in the review process, you can use a microphone or a headset, and Remark will interpret what you're saying. And we find it quite useful for long comments, particularly in surveys. So if you don't want to either hand enter the comments or take those image clips that we have now, I know sometimes people don't want to show handwriting or it's hard to read. You can actually speak the comments. You can also speak in just multiple choice answers too. Now, we strongly suggest that you train your computer to recognize your voice. So Microsoft has a training process built into Windows that you can run through. It takes about 5 minutes, and it's really good. It tells you, it makes you read sentences, but those sentences are actually also telling you how to optimize speech recognition. But once you do that, we have found in our testing, it works really well. The system is pretty good at recognizing what you want to say. So I'm going to try it out here. And the way you turn it on is you click this microphone. So I'm going to click the microphone, and then I'm going to start going through my exceptions. And let me zoom this out a little bit. Okay. Medium. Next. 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 PA. Next. Make it 3 days. Next. Corporate. Next. DE. Next. Of all the years I have gone to this conference, this was very disappointing. Next. 5. Next. Graduate. Next. TX. Next. Next. CA. Next. I wish there were more networking opportunities for newcomers. Next. Human resources. Next. Medium. Finish. So you can see I went through the entire data set, and I was just clicking next to go to the next item once I liked what I had, and I can make corrections. I saw it missed a couple words here and there, and you don't have to click next. You can go in the title bar and actually make any corrections you want to. But it worked reasonably well, and it was a really fast way to both review my data and get those comments in there. So we're pretty excited about that feature. So let's go ahead into Quick Stats again. I'll go into Advanced Survey. Very few changes here, really just a refresh on the look. Once again, we added the ability to add the headers on this first screen so that you don't have to go into that more cumbersome screen. So again, I could put the date, and one thing that's new in here is the number of respondents. So if you want to see how many people replied to your survey overall, you can add that in the header. And we still have our question properties, which is all the same information that we had before. And our analysis groups just got a new look and feel, just like in the advanced grade. We now have the ability to do the groups just like we did before. So if this is called satisfaction, I can grab my questions related to satisfaction and add them over. And of course, you can still benchmark it. So I'll benchmark it 4 out of 5. So no real change other than the workflow here. And you can still do question weights. So you can add in your group, if one of my questions is more important to me than others, I can make them weighted higher. So this one might be 2, and oops, this one might be 2 as well, and so forth. So no real changes here, just a facelift. So we'll go ahead and click Analyze. And I want to show you another new report. So we've always had this report, which is our condensed item analysis. And we've always had the response reports, which are for the open-ended handwritten questions. And we've often been asked to have one report that shows both, as opposed to having to run 2 different reports. So we added this in the item analysis group, integrated item analysis. And what it's going to do is ask me for, the non-multiple choice questions I want, which are basically my handwriting. Let me just pick a couple. I'm not really sure which ones I filled in there, but we'll go ahead and run the report. So we have our header at the top, and there's 10 for the number of respondents. And it goes in the order of the way your questions were defined in the template. So the first few pages are going to be just item analysis. And let's take a look here. I think we start to get into our open-ended. So here's, our other employment, in which state do you reside. I think on this page we actually have the longer comments that I wrote in. So now it's all integrated together, which kind of is a little more meaningful. You can, actually go with the flow of your form when you're looking at the analysis. So we hope that that's a big help. We also added a new Excel export. So over here in the task pane, we've always had Excel in there, but it was a little, it didn't work that well, let's just say. So we added a new one. I'm going to save that. And basically what it does is it takes all of the reports and it puts them into Excel for you to further manipulate. The only reports that aren't included are the ones that have user input, like a comparative report where you need to tell it what to filter on. Currently, those are not in here. But at the bottom are these tabs that show each report. And if there's a report you don't use, just like in Excel, I can right-click and either delete it or hide it and so forth. But you can then further manipulate these reports, and they, compared to the old format, hopefully they look a lot better to you. But you have all this data now in Excel that you can work with. So the other item I want to show you is more on the back end of things. So when Remark gets installed, in the past, we've always put it in your program files folder. And it was a little cumbersome to find files that you're working with, like templates and data, because it's, you had to kind of drill down, and it's not often you go into your program files. So what we did was move everything to the My Documents folder in your document library. So there's now in My Documents a Remark Office OMR folder, and just like we had before, you have your analysis definitions, your data, your images, your templates, and here's where the tutorial files are as well. So while the program still gets installed in program files, this is now the new storage mechanism for the files that you're going to be using. As always, you can store files anywhere you want. This is just the default, so we hope it makes it easier to find things. The one thing I will mention, though, is if you have more than one user of Remark that shares a computer that has Remark on it, the My Documents folder is unique to each person that logs into a computer. So if I log in on this shared computer and I create a template and put it in My Documents, if my colleague logs in, they're not going to see that template, which may be good or bad. It depends on your workflow. Just because the My Documents folder is different per user. So if that's okay, then you're good to go. But if you want to be able to share files and you're using the same computer as someone else, what I would recommend you do is find a shared location to save your templates and data and images, preferably something like a mapped drive so that whoever logs into that computer can get to that location. And then the last area I want to show you is back in the software, and it's the preferences. So if we go to Tools, Preferences, this is just the way that the features that we use to customize the software to our use. And what I wanted to point out here is this section here. We've always had the concept of a missing value, which is something that's invalid data. But what people have asked for over time is to be able to look at multiple responses and blank responses separately. So we've added that ability to break them out here, and they each get their own missing value. So when you export your data, let's say you go to SPSS, you'll be able to look at them separately. And the Remark reports also show them separately. You'll have a line item for missing, you'll have a line item for multiple, so that you can distinguish blank responses from multiple responses. On the Speech tab, this is the commands that you heard me saying to move through the review process. This speech recognition button also will bring you to that training session that I mentioned earlier. So if you're not sure where to find it, and actually this pops up the first time you use it as well, you can just click this button and it'll take you right to that training part of Windows so that you can train your computer to recognize your voice. And the last item is the check for updates. So we've always had the ability to look for new updates to the software, either manually or every time the program starts. But what I wanted to mention is, beginning with this version, we are moving our support model to support and maintenance, which means that you will need to purchase maintenance in order to get updates. And we hope that this is really a win-win situation because we really want to be able to push out updates sooner. So we get a lot of requests from all of you in, and if we only have a release every 3 years, you're waiting and waiting for your requests. So we really want to be able to push out the updates more often, which would have both bug fixes as well as new features. So by being current on your maintenance, you will get all of those enhancements as they come out. And I think hopefully the cost will end up being a wash to you because you're paying an upgrade fee every 2 to 3 years. And this way we're just kind of spreading it out. If you just pay for maintenance, annually, you'll be getting all these updates. You'll be getting more updates that you would have had to pay an upgrade fee for before. So hopefully, it'll be a wash for you. But again, our main goal here is to be able to keep your software up to date more often and make improvements that you really need. So that concludes the webinar at this point. If you have any questions about the new version, certainly contact us. And if you want to learn more about pricing and so forth, you can contact our sales department. We're always happy to talk to you. And we really appreciate you attending this webinar today. Thanks and have a great day.